Assalamu alaikum students. This is lecture number lecture number three in part two. Actually, lecture number three was a little short lecture due to certain problems in the laptop. That lecture could not be finished. So this is the second part of that lecture, and in this lecture I will finish lecture number three. So we were here in the first part, the pigeons revolt. We discussed pigeons revolt. Now, inshallah, we are going to discuss. We're going to talk about Black Death. Remember, we are talking about the age of Chaucer, and it is very important to know about writer's age. So, this is the fourth thing that you should remember: Black Death. Black Death that is called, of course, it was plague. If you talk about brief history of Black Death, so we realize that, or we find that during the reign of Edward III, the people of Europe and England, they suffered terribly from the plague. They suffered terribly from the plague, and that plague is called Black Death. And if you read it from any other book or from any history book, you'll find this very commonly in history because it is probably it is called that the first, it was a big disaster. You can see this plague affected the whole Europe. It broke out in England. England से ये start हुआ था, यानी कि शुरू इंग्लैंड से हुआ था in 1348 and continued its havoc, its destruction for about 2 years. 2 years और ये तकरीबन 2 साल तक अपनी तबाही पिलाता रहा. And the population of England was, remember, about 35 lakh, means 3.5 million की जो population, उस वक्त इंग्लैंड की population जो थी 3.5 million थी before the plague, but nearly 1 million, means 10 lakhs, nearly 1 million, let me write it here, 3.5 millions. So the total population of England that time was 3.5 millions before the plague, but nearly 1 million, means 10 lakh, nearly 1 million people were killed. Nearly 1 million were killed by the plague. So you can understand and you can realize the terrible destruction and disaster this disease brought, and that is why it was called Black Death. Now, the whole economic and social system of England lay prostrate, means सब कुछ ठप होकर रह गया. The whole economic and social system, collapsed. There was none to cut the harvest or to sow the crops. ना उनके पास कोई फसल काटने के लिए मजदूर बचे, ना क्रॉप्स उगाने के लिए कोई इनको पास मजदूर बचे. In the Middle Ages, a poor man who had to work for a richer man in return for a small piece of land to grow food. So that person was called villain. So they all had perished. ये सब मर चुके थे, सब खत्म हो चुके थे. The whole labor force of the country was terribly reduced. The population of England was about 3.5 lakhs before the plague, and nearly 1 million were killed by the plague. The whole economic and social system of England, collapsed or lay prostrate. There was no one to cut the harvest or to sow the crops. The villains means those who were poor and they used to work on the lands of the richer people. They also had perished. The whole labor force of the country was terribly reduced. Now, what was this Black Death? So, as I've told you that it was, the disease of plague, and in this disease, what used to happen that boils, black boils used to appear on the body. काले रंग के फोड़े होते थे जो जिस्म पर अपीयर होना शुरू हो जाते थे और जिससे डेथ हो जाया करती थी. And this plague, as I've already mentioned, affected the whole Europe, and it started from England, and then it spread throughout the Europe. Remember, the main results, the whole labor force of the country was terribly reduced. Labor force भी बहुत तेजी से कम होगी, and the main results of this tragedy can be noted in this way that in a single sweep, it nearly half the labor force of the country. यानी कि तकरीबन जो कंट्री की जो लेबर फोर्स थी वो 50% जो है वो ख़त्म हो गई. वेजेस रोज बाय 50%. जब लेबर फोर्स उनके पास कम हो गई तो ज़्यादा लेबर फोर्स की डिमांड बढ़ गई. और फिर उन्होंने क्या किया कि 50% जो है वो उजरत बढ़ा दी. Many of the surviving villains became cash earners. और इसके बाद बहुत से जो सरवाइव कर गए थे मजदूर तबका, तो उनको काफ़ी आसानी हुई मजदूरी ढूंढने में. एंड दे अर्न मनी. The peasant revolt was almost a direct result of the Black Death. और ये कहा जाता है कि जो peasants का revolt था वो भी Black Death का एक डायरेक्ट जो था रिजल्ट था, इफेक्ट था. So I would like all of you to read about Black Death in the Middle Ages, and it will definitely give you a very good idea how terrible it was and what was its impact. After this, we have the role of church in the age of Chaucer. Remember, church. If you talk about church, so the corruption of the church can be noted easily in Chaucer's age. In this regard, W. H. Hudson has observed what he says that of spiritual zeal and energy, very little was now left in the country. The greater prelates heaped up wealth and lived in a godless and worldly way. The rank and file of the clergy were ignorant and careless. The mendicant friars were notorious for their greed and profligacy. Chaucer himself, as we shall presently have to note, took little serious interest in social reform. Yet the portraits which he draws for us of the fate, pleasure-loving monk, the merry and wanton friar, and the clever rogue, the partner who wanders about hawking indulgences and relics show that he was alive to the shocking stage of things which existed in the religious world of his time. So there were many things, many wrong things which were going on in the church. यानी कि चर्च जो जिम्मेदारी चर्च को निभानी चाहिए थी वो निभानी रहा था. मेरे चर्च के अंदर लोग जो थे काम करने वाले, लाइक पार्टनर, फ्रायर, and you will find here many other characters like mm, so according to the writer, that they should have performed their religious duties, but unfortunately they started doing, or they started going for worldly pleasure, pleasure-loving monk, the merry and wanton friar, the clever rogue, the partner. So these all the characters you will also find in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. Wycliffe, the morning star of the Reformation, that earnest and intrepid man gave the best of his life to the great task of reviving spiritual Christianity in England, and in the carrying out of his mission, he wrote religious pamphlets, sent his poor priests or itinerant preachers far and wide with the message of the gospel, and with the help of his disciples, produced a complete English version of the Bible, the first translation of the scriptures into any modern vernacular tongue. So it came a little late, and you will find that the role of church was, the role church was not playing that role which they should play, and that's why you'll find it is also called Middle Ages is also called the Dark Ages. एंड लेटर ऑन रिफॉर्मेशन केम इन टू बींग. उसके बाद जो है एक दो सदी के बाद जब ये सिलसिला चलता रहा तो फिर कुछ लोग जो उनमें जो थे, दे वर सिंसियर, सीरियस, एंड दे दे डिड नॉट लाइक bad things, and they did not like such corruption, so they parted themselves, they separated themselves from the church, and then they formed new movement that is called Reformation. और जिस मूवमेंट का नाम बाद में रिफॉर्मेशन पड़ा, और वो जो थे उसको जो लेके चल रहे थे उनको रिफॉर्मिस्ट, या उनको क्या कहेंगे उसे, प्रोटेस्टेंट्स कहा गया. Then you will find another thing, nationalism. Chaucer was born at a most interesting time in English history. If we see or read English history, Now, this was the time when nationalism was beginning to make itself felt. ये वो वक्त था जब nationalism was coming to them. They were really having the feeling of national. They were having the feeling that they were one nation. He was born in days when wits were fresh and clear, and life ran gaily as the sparkling Thames. England was becoming a united realm. She had already absorbed Wales, partly absorbed Ireland, and made a temporarily successful effort to complete the United Kingdom by a short-lived conquest of Scotland. ये सब जो थे आपस में एक हो रहे थे and that later on became UK. इंग्लैंड्स लॉज वर बीइंग एम्पलीफाइड एंड कॉडिफाइड उनकी जो लॉज थे उनको भी एम्पलीफाइड और कॉडिफाई किए जा रहे थे हर यूनिवर्सिटीज़ वर ग्रोइंग इन इम्पोर्टेंस और जो यूनिवर्सिटीज़ इंग्लैंड में थी उनकी अहमियत बढ़ रही थी इंग्लैंड्स प्रोग्रेस स्ट्रक फॉरेनर्स एज यूजुअल और इंग्लैंड की जो तरक्की थी उससे भी फॉरेनर्स भी बहुत मुतासर हो रहे थे एंड इन द पेजेस ऑफ Froissart, we have wonderful picture of English life. So England is a strong land. ये वहाँ एक उस वक्त एक राइटर ने बताया इंग्लिश इंग्लैंड इज अ स्ट्रॉन्ग लैंड अ स्टडी इन द plenteous plenteous corner of the world. So of course the feeling of nationalism was coming to them और वो अपने आप को एक कौम समझने लगे और ये फीलिंग बहुत ही अहम थी that Chaucer felt in his time. So this is one of the characteristics of Chaucer's age. New learning. Now, what is new learning? Another influence which did much to change the current of intellectual interest. And this is another influence which did much to change the current of intellectual interest and it affected literature very directly. ये जो new learning है इसने literature को directly काफ़ी मुतासिर किया. It came from the new learning so far, scholarship had been largely the concern of the church. इस वक्त तक तो स्कॉलरशिप का जो ताल्लुक था चर्च था and men's thoughts and feelings about themselves and the world had been governed almost entirely by theology और theology कहते हैं दीनियात को and ये चर्च ही का ओल्ड होल्ड सब पर था ecclesiastical ideas and the medieval habit of mind were still the controlling elements in Chaucer period. Remember, ecclesiastical ideas कहते हैं वही जो religious सेक्टर से आते हैं यानी रिलीजियस लोग जिसको प्रोवाइड करते हैं आइडियाज़ को तो ecclesiastical ideas और द medieval habit ऑफ माइंड और medieval habit जो था जो मिडिल एजेस में जो एक जहन बना हुआ था उनका स्टिल देवर कंट्रोलिंग एलिमेंट्स ये अभी भी चौसठ के एज में यही चीज़ें जो थी कंट्रोल करनी थी लोगों को उनके जहनों को बट देयर स्वे वॉज नाउ टू सम एक्सटेंट ब्रोकन बाय द इन्फ्लक्स ऑफ फ्रेश एंड वेरी डिफरेंट स्पिरिट बट थिंग्स वर हैपनिंग कुछ डिफरेंट हो रहा था even Chaucer's age, and that spirit had arisen in Italy chiefly from a renewed study of the literature of classical antiquity. और यही स्पिरिट जो है बाद में इटली से उठा और याद रखिएगा फ्रॉम इटली इटली वाज द फर्स्ट प्लेस फ्रॉम वेयर रेनेसा बिगेन एंड रेनेसा बिगेन फ्रॉम इटली तो ये रेनेसा पे जो है इटली से ही शुरू हुआ 14वीं सेंचुरी के थिंग मिड में and Italy was the hub of learning that time. Hudson has written, क्या लिखता है Hudson? An enormous impetus was thus given to intellectual expansion and to men's efforts to liberate themselves from theological trammels. The leaders of this great revival were the two celebrated Italian writers. सो इस जो एक किस्म का रिवाइवल था इसके जो दो लीडर्स थे वो कौन थे दे वर वेरी फेमस इटालियन राइटर्स पेट्रार्क एंड बोccaccio आप लोगों ने इसका नाम इन दोनों राइटर्स का नाम लाजमी सुना होगा पेट्रार्क एंड बोccaccio एंड चौसर्स work we can see the influence of these writers and it was through their work in the main that the influence of humanism पास इनटू इंग्लैंड और यहीं से इन्फ्लुएंस ऑफ ह्यूमनिज्म जो है वो इंग्लैंड में आया वेयर इट्स इफेक्ट वाज सून शोन इन अ क्विकन सेंस ऑफ ब्यूटी अ डिलाइट इन लाइफ अ फ्री सेक्युलर स्पिरिट विच बिगेन टू अपीयर इन इंग्लिश लिटरेचर और जो इंग्लिश लिटरेचर में भी फिर अपीयर होना शुरू हुआ इन्हीं इससे पहले जो था होल्ड था चर्च का और उसके बाद ह्यूमनिज्म जब आया तो उन्होंने जो है बहुत सी चीज़ें तब्दील कर दी मीन्स सेंस ऑफ ब्यूटी अ डिलाइट इन लाइफ फ्री सेक्युलर स्पिरिट they all started coming into literature. Here we mark the rise of the vast and complex movement. which was presently to culminate in the Renaissance. But though of little power, as yet humanism has to be included among the formative influences of the literature of Chaucer's age. So this is what we have about another very important characteristic, and this is what we call new learning. Then we proceed. If when we proceed, we can find that English language, you know, birth of English language and the literary writers. As I told you, that Black Death contributed a lot in the development of English language. Before Black Death, you will find the Hundred Years' War. It also had its contribution in the development of English language. The last half of the 14th century saw the birth of the English language. Ever since the Norman conquest means 1066, French had dominated the social. यानी जब से नॉर्मन्स आए 1066 में नॉर्मन्स ने अपना मतलब they started ruling. So French had dominated the social and political life of the upper classes. तो उस वक्त से फ्रेंच की जो थी डोमिनेंस थी सोशल और पॉलिटिकल लाइफ अपर क्लास की जो सोशल और पॉलिटिकल लाइफ थी उस पर उनकी डोमिनेंस थी बट नाउ वेरियस सर्कमस्टेंसेस कंबाइंड टू एस्टेब्लिश द सुपरमेसी ऑफ इंग्लिश लेकिन अब इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज की सुपरमेसी और इंग्लिश की सुपरमेसी जो है वो शुरू होने लगी कुछ वजूहत ऐसी थी जिनकी वजह से now, the English mind awoke from the lethargy of bondage, and modern English literature had its birth. And this is how modern English literature also, you know, you'll find the birth of modern English literature. English prose and English poetry alike sprang to life. फिर English prose भी आपको मिलेंगे और English poetry भी आपको मिलेगी. Geoffrey Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales about the same time. So Geoffrey Chaucer ने Canterbury Tales लिखी और about the same time appeared the works of John Wycliffe or John Wycliffe, who as Chaucer is called the father of English verse, जिसको फिर उसके इसी वक्त जॉन विक्लिफ एक राइटर लिटरेरी फिगर था हु कॉल्ड चौसर द फादर ऑफ इंग्लिश वर्ड्स जिसने चौसर को इंग्लिश वर्ड्स का जो है बानी कहा ही मे जस्टली बी स्टाइल द फादर ऑफ इंग्लिश प्रोज तो उसको कहा जाता है कि फादर ऑफ इंग्लिश प्रोज प्रोज के नाम से उसके बारे में कहा जाता है कि जॉन विक्लिफ वाज द फादर ऑफ इंग्लिश प्रोज So Wycliffe's Bible is an example of vigorous, artless English, and his controversial pamphlets illustrated the capabilities of the English language at a time when Latin was normally employed as a medium of theological discussion. So this is a very important thing to remember. उस वक्त लेटिन ये वो वक्त था जब लेटिन लैंग्वेज ही इस्तेमाल होती थी फॉर फॉर theological means discussion यानी religious context में but he is the one who introduced English and he translated Bible the Bible. Wycliffe's Bible is an important landmark in the religious, social and literary history of England. विक्लिफ्स जॉन विक्लिफ ने जो तर्जुमा किया था बाइबल का इट इज एन इम्पोर्ट बाइबल का अंग्रेजी में तर्जुमा किया था सो इट इज एन इम्पोर्टेंट लैंडमार्क इन द रिलीजियस social and literary history of England. John Wycliffe made in prose a new contribution to the national language and literature. उसने prose में नया contribution अपना दिया language और literature में and the translation is one of the first great prose monuments in English और ये one of the first great prose monuments कहा जाता है in English. And its wide popularity in spite of the occasional stiff and unidiomatic translation English rendered it influential in gaining for the vernacular opposition of dignity and honor. वहाँ से अंग्रेजी ज़बान तकवीयत मिली. But the great prose work of this period is a book known. लेकिन इसके अलावा जो एक ज़बरदस्त किताब है of this period that is known the Travels of Sir John Mandeville, a translation from French. Even though a translation, this book takes its place as the first English prose classic, and its simple and effortless style had a happy effect on the development of English prose literature. So, according to Sainsbury, the prose of this work shows an advance in ease and resource on Wycliffe. Sainsbury gives high praise to this work when he says, to see the marvel of the rising of literary prose style in English, there is no better way than to read Mandeville. एक कमेंटेटर ने कहा कि मैनविल्स ही के जो प्रोस वर्क है उसको पढ़ें, वो दिस इज बेटर. So the age of Chaucer is a period of great activity in all walks of life. The age resembles not a stagnant pool but a flowing river. यानी उस एज को कहा जाता है कि वो कोई गंदा, एक होता है ना तालाब का पानी होता है जो एक जगह खड़ा हुआ बस बदबूदार हो जाता है, लेकिन एक होता है दरिया, दरिया का पानी बहता रहता है. तो कहा जाता है कि चौसर की एज की मिसाल ऐसी कि दरिया का पानी था जो बहता रहता है और साफ ही रहता है. So this age with all its vexed and troubled problems approximates the modern age. And then there's Ketrelage calls a period of a singularly modern time. R.K. Root, in his book The Poetry of Chaucer, has beautifully summed up the age in the following words. उसने जबरदस्त तरीके से इस एज को सम अप किया है. क्या कहता है? But if the world of 14th century England was sadly out of joint, it was far from being stagnant. In its intellectual ferment, the age had much the same character as the age of great Elizabeth. There was the same glow of patriotism and national consciousness consequent upon a series of brilliant victories against a foreign foe, former enemies. There was the same spirit of revolt against the foreign church, and though the forms of medievalism still survive, there was at work the same leaven of new ideas and of new conception of life, reinforced by a new interest in the works of classical antiquity. So literature and art was drinking again at the fountainhead of nature. So these were the words which were expressed by R.K. Root in his book, The Poetry of Chaucer. So, in short, we can say Chaucer lived in an age which was definitely epoch making in religious hold those door में social and political plans, and you'll also find social and political plans. But unlike Gower, Chaucer saw the brilliant side of the contemporary world. Gower, Chaucer से okay, हम अगर थोड़ा सा हटे तो हम देखते हैं कि चौसर ने जो है brilliant side देखा था of his contemporary world. So this is what we have about the age of Chaucer. I hope you must have understood this. Remember, for this you have to watch both these videos, part one and part two both, and you must buy the books which I have recommended you so that you can understand things properly. You can find information about the age of Chaucer even from the books of history as well. History की books में भी आपको इंशाल्लाह ये information आसानी से मिल जाएगी. और इसको ज़हन में रखिएगा, such information is very useful. Why? Because when we study any writer, so we must also know about the age, because normally writers write about their age. अगर एज ही का नहीं पता होगा, उनके दौर का नहीं मालूम होगा, तो उस सूरत में हमें उनके जो भी हम वर्क्स को स्टडी करेंगे पढ़ेंगे, so we will face great problems. And Chaucer's work represent his age. He was a representative of his age as well, so we must know about his age. So if you have any question regarding this, you can ask me. Waiting for your queries, and you can ask me in the next session, session 4. Thank you very much.